Attack on Titan, one of the best things ever, is over. That was it. And Jesus Christ, that was a beautiful send-off. Let's talk about the final episode of Attack on Titan. Make sure to subscribe. Let's start off with a few general things. The quantity of animation. Seeing such a large amount of sakuga in a season 4 episode was pleasantly surprising. Also, the drawing quality was respectively high. Director Yuichiro Hayashi gives a lot of importance to the drawings and the facial expressions. It was nice to see his vision get executed in a satisfactory manner. Of course, the 3D was amazing as well, mostly. The past Titans are a mix of 2D and 3D. The unique looking ones are 2D because it doesn't make much sense to create an entire 3D model for a character that shows up for a few cuts at best, and the rest are reworked versions of existing models. And think about it, every single one of these titans had to be designed separately. That's an outrageous amount of character design work. They are really good at 2D 3D interaction at this point. The 3D scenes don't look awkward for the most part. At least they look a lot better than the stuff you normally find in anime. The 3D team is too good. The models have a ton of 2D touch-ups which make them look even more detailed. The action storyboards are amazing. I believe Hayashi storyboarded everything besides the Imai sequence near the end. That was storyboarded by Imai himself. And I think Hayashi perfectly captured the main idea behind Attack on Titan's action. Speed, abruptness, and dynamic motion. Even without top-tier movement, Hayashi manages to put together these thrilling scenes. The transition from the fast-moving shot to a slow-motion one is really well done. Such a harsh momentum cutoff. Also, look at the amount of detail on the eye. It's ridiculous. This episode has a lot of action animation. Even the short bursts of action move and don't feel limited or stiff. Also, insanely well-drawn Titan shots, you love to see it. This scene is the first major action sequence. It's a long cut with tons of complicated camera work. The camera does a complete 180, which is obviously made possible by the CGI. Both peak and the background is 3D. The other Titans, however, are not, and the 2D Titans pop in and out of this scene perfectly. Also, stop for a second and look how complicated this design is. The bone pillars are 3D except for this one. Again, really well done storyboards. We know Peak is moving fast, but it looks like she's barely covering any ground because of how large Eren is. Stuff like that gets the scale across. Peak is 2D here, by the way. Also an insanely well drawn slow motion shot. The action is so well done. It's dynamic and well structured. Interestingly enough, this Titan is 3D. Pretty sure it's a modified version of Reiner's model, since the chest, neck and arms look identical. It's quite clever actually. More of those quick movement heavy cuts. This one starts off as a close-up, a really well drawn close-up, and ends as a wide shot. I love the compositing work on the explosions this time around. I know some don't because you can't fully appreciate the 2D details or whatever, but I think it gets the intensity and the sheer heat across. The Levi scene was insane. It was animated by J1, an unexpected name. Really love the webgen-like wind effects at the start. This is just classic ODM gear action. Dynamic storyboards with the character closing in on and moving away from the camera, dynamic CGI backgrounds, and fast movement. Although the actual strikes and slashes were a bit lacking. Levi flies past an ape and blood effects simply appear. I feel like it should have slowed down a bit during these moments. Also, I could have done without the extreme close-ups. Regardless, it's really well animated all around. Also, the texture work on Eren is solid, better than the previous episode. The sync between the 3D Spike and the 2D Titan looks a bit off here. I feel like the relative scale wasn't well conveyed. Jiggle physics on a Titan, by the way. If anything, it made this scene more complicated to draw, but they did it anyway. Thank you. Seeing such a large amount of ODM gear action makes me happy. Also, here's more of that clever CGI trickery. This Titan is obviously a reworked version of Reiner, while this one is a reworked version of Annie. Even simple scenes like these are actually animated, which is great. Some very well drawn cuts here. Amazing shading and foreshortening on the thunder spears. Also multiple layers of shading on the fingers. Why not? Incredible eye shot here. Eye close-ups are synonymous with AOT at this point. Not the biggest fan of these slow motion shots. The movement filter thing they add can be a hit or miss. A miss in this case. They look like cheap moving assets. The new 3D models look fine. It would have been jarring if they had a lot of screen time. This is one of my favorite non-action cuts. The seamless camera pan and the shift in color and compositing that came with it. Such a creative shot. Loved the streaks of light. Also, the drawing quality was really good here. I believe Manabu Akita corrected this section. Look how good this shot looks. It's not overly complicated, the characters aren't moving, the steam is digital and the background is simply panning to one side, but it looks so cinematic. Also, the lighting is really well done. I think it's entirely handled by the compositing team. Of course, the scene still moves. The camera wrapping around Mikasa felt intense. The action was always animated. Even the small exchanges looked good. As Eren, aka the entire f***ing background, is CG, they could pull off these cinematic sweeping shots with a ton of volume. As for Falco's model, I'm not the biggest fan. The CGI feathers flopping around does look a bit awkward. It's somewhat unappealing. Also, they were a bit too heavy-handed with the digital smoke here. Also, those teeth look awkward. I was genuinely blown away by how good the Titan drawings were. Insane anatomy and top-tier shading. Falco's descent felt dangerously fast thanks to the well-executed camera work. Trust me, those subtle camera shakes add a lot. This sequence was so unnecessarily well choreographed. Every Titan besides Reiner was 2D, although I'm not sure about this cut. And the designs were so good. Also love this run-up. Reminds me of Sangu Park for some reason. Again, flawless 3D 2D interaction. This bit was surprisingly grounded. Reiner literally drop-kicked a Titan at one point. Also, Reiner is 2D here, so is the other Titan, and look how amazing the drawings are. Top-tier shading. Good perspective work on the axe throw as well. I've said this a million times, but I'll say it again. The scenes look dynamic. The pillars flying by in the background help with that. Things are always in motion, and even when they aren't, the camera work makes it look like they are. Michelle Sugimoto's sequence was an early highlight. Loved the comical body language here. A nice change of pace. This transformation was out of this world. The sheer level of detail was absurd. You could see the muscle fibers form. Such an amazingly fluid scene. Also, the compositing conserves the detail instead of burying it, unlike part 1. Love the layout work here. It gets across the scale and a sense of weight. The camera mostly maintains a consistent amount of distance from Jean, so the other objects shift in size, which makes for a cool look. Also, the cart was almost entirely 2D here. Of course, you could find a few 3D cuts which were, not very good. The rendering on Reiner looks very dirty here. It looks compressed. The general storyboard work was really well done, as expected. Hayashi made sure to get the scale across whenever he could, although this transformation looked weak. It was a ball of light simply appearing. The camera was always moving during these action scenes, which made things feel fast. Even when the animation was normal, the 3D background aided camera work made the scene special. Loved the quick transitions between the top of the ribs and the underside. It was a creative concept. Smooth bit of animation here. I loved the way they did this throw. I think they simply drew these thick smears on top of the 3D animation along the outlines. Also, since the background is 3D, they can make the camera move as fast as they want, which is why this cut feels like a genuine roller coaster. Although the actual action wasn't the best. It was an extreme close-up, so you couldn't really see the slash. A very well-drawn slow-motion shot here. I don't think the Titan hand is CGI, even though it's the same design as Reiner. Also, really appreciate the fact that you can see her reflection on the blade. Props to the team for hand-drawing this Titan. At least I think it's hand-drawn. That's not a simple design. Really good bit of character acting here. Very vivid facial expressions. They have that unique Hayashi-ness to them. Hayashi has a distinct way of drawing facial expressions, even as a storyboard artist, and it's difficult to execute that style correctly, but this scene nailed it. The drawings are quite consistent as well. The animation perfectly complements the insane voice acting. The rumbling scenes look phenomenal. I've talked about them before. The CGI colossals look insane, and the compositing makes them look more natural by hiding imperfections. Also, the color grading changes depending on the scene, but maintains a certain level of consistency. It always feels Doomsday-like. These guys are hand-drawn, and the rest of the crowd is CGI. Also, wonderful pieces of background art. There isn't much happening animation-wise, besides the effects and the occasional crowd animation, but the direction is masterful. It took Hayashi mere seconds sequence to change the tone. I love it when an adaptation actually adds stuff. This scene being black and white, for example. It's not subtle, but it's effective. The animation took a backseat for a few minutes and the direction took over. The storyboards were consistently engaging. For example, the multi-layered background pan on the sand castle, almost as if it was a real structure. Loved this sequence. The lava is digital and the CGI ocean and the camera work around it is top-notch. Also, the drawings during the flashback looked phenomenal. I believe they were corrected by character designer Tomohiro Kishi. The blur is unfortunate, but it does add to the scene direction-wise. The Zeke drawings were strong as well. Loved the camera angle here, wonderful scaling. Here's a well-drawn 2D close-up of Reiner's face, which seamlessly transitions to 3D. The cuts here aren't too insane animation-wise, but they look great regardless. I've talked about this already. The visuals hold their own and the camera work is consistently engaging. Also, keeping track of all the individual moving elements must have been complicated. They took the 3D base for Eren, which could have been a massive handicap, and turned it into one of their biggest visual strengths. Also, the amount of 2D Titan animation is definitely praiseworthy. Loved Mikasa sliding up the pillar. Again, the actual animation here isn't too over the top. The movement is good, but it's not as insane as it looks. It's the overall camera work and presentation that makes it look so amazing. Does every cut look flawless? No. Does every bit of CGI look good? No. But as a whole, the positives outweigh the negatives by a lot. Loved the color reappearing here. Hayashi is an amazing director, in case you didn't know. Look at the camera work. The camera moves backwards while simultaneously rotating halfway. This adds more energy to the already impactful strike. Jean gets a solid ODM cut. The most impressive thing about it is its length, clocking in at over 10 seconds, and the Titan animation. The animated zoom on the Titan looks really satisfying. The actual movement isn't too insane. It's just Jean flipping and flying around somewhat aimlessly. The drawing quality isn't too crazy either, but again, the CGI landscape makes it look faster and more dynamic. Also, don't get me wrong, the animation is still very impressive, but I'm judging it based on ODM animation standards. Another volumetric cut. The slow but heavy camera movement towards Eren's head looks very cinematic. An interesting shot here. It is CGI, I think, but the white highlights on the hair might be hand-drawn. I have mixed feelings about these two cuts. The movement is quite janky, but the drawings look weirdly appealing because they are 2D, and this cut is Kagenashi. The explosion looks fine. It looks like an explosion. The hallucigenia is 3D and has this veiny texture to it. Its appearance causes another shift in the compositing. The scenes now have a strong blue glow. The amount of compositing switch-ups throughout this episode was insane. Really love the way this thing moves. It genuinely looks like an organism desperately searching for a host. Also, the large amount of wind effects makes everything feel faster. These scenes are almost entirely 3D, which is why the team could add so much movement. The struggle looks frantic, which is perfect. Also, another amazing drawing. The more I look at it, the better it gets. It's perfect. This is one of the best looking explosions in the entire show. Animated by Satoshi Sakai, it's so ridiculous. It starts off with an impact frame sequence, followed by an extremely well animated set of effects. Each component works so well. The main body of the explosion, the effects over it, and the wind effects around it, and some lightning for good measure. Sakai's mastery of effects animation was put on display here. Insane work. And the color scheme changes again. This time it's a dirty green. What is it, the 10th one so far? Although I will say this episode did overdo it a bit with the digital steam/smoke. It's composited well, but still. Armin's 3D model looks very good. The staff is probably used to CGI colossals at this point. We get another insane explosion, this one being a lot faster and more energetic, which makes sense story-wise. And the colors change again. The show now takes place in literal hell. Look how good these shots are. The red tone is wonderful. You can find a few awkward looking CGI cuts, of course you can, but as a whole the CGI looks very good, although I might be a bit biased. We get some background animation here, with the camera doing camera things. Again, I can't get over how perfect the hallucigenia's movement is. Completely unlike intelligent life, if that makes sense. It looks like an organism driven by survival instinct and nothing else. Also, such a heavy cut. It's not just the camera closing in, it's the subtle camera shake, the animated shadow underneath Reiner, the wind effects and the sparks, as well as Reiner's slow, weight-filled movement. The team has pretty much normalized adding smears on 3D models at this point, which is an insane sentence. This cut confused a lot of people. I think this is 2D, which is absurd because they made this insanely complicated design rotate. Also, this shot makes Eren look large. He is large, but the anime needs to convey that visually. Also, the red color scheme with the flickers flying around helps the CGI models blend in. These models would look a lot more awkward if they were present near the start of this episode, with the white and green color palette. Color design and compositing helps. In my opinion, they cut away from this shot too quickly. I wish it was a second or two longer. By this point, the screen was really busy. So much was happening all at once. The CGI, the 2D, the hand-drawn effects, the digital stuff, the color palette, every cut was insanely complicated, especially for the compositing team. We then get to the cabin scenes. Not much happens animation-wise. The storyboards were nice, the general presentation/art direction was solid, some drawings were off-model and weak, but others were really good. Anyway, back to the fight, we get one of the best looking CGI cuts from this show. The models blend in because of all the reasons I just mentioned, and the camera constantly rotates, making sure the audience remembers how large both these entities are. Most of the movement feels impactful. The smears on the models and the camera work helps. The last couple of seconds do look a bit stiff, mostly because the camera slows down. Also, Mr. Hayashi, the inside of Eren's mouth didn't need to look this cinematic. Calm down, lad. This cut was a bit hard to follow, but that added to the overall chaos. It's the literal end of the world, and it looks like it. We then get Arifumi Imai's sequence, and this was one of, if not the best looking cut from this show. Imai created ODM gear animation, and him coming back to animate the last one is poetic. He storyboarded this scene as well, and based on the 100 Cams documentary, he used 3D layouts and drew over them, although I'm not too sure. It's a 24-second cut filled with top-notch character animation, an outrageous amount of moving elements, and tons of dynamic camera work. The amount of spatial awareness on display here is absurd. Creating a cut this long and complicated requires generational talent. The rocks are mostly drawn by Imai, but a few of them appear to be CGI. Levi does a barrel roll in the air, and the camera rotates around him effortlessly. It originally followed Levi from the front, but now it's following him from behind. And every component on screen moves accordingly. Levi has this lingering wind effect on him, which makes the motion feel faster. The camera slows down for a second as Levi slows down to dodge this rock. The camera then shifts again and follows Levi from the front again. Also, you can literally see Levi's leg wound open back up here. Imai wouldn't let speed compromise his attention to detail. He wouldn't let speed compromise his drawing quality either. Look how beautiful these frames are. Imai is really good at drawing. I know it's shocking, but it's true. Also, the compositing does this scene justice. Really love the blue-green glow here. Now, most normal people would end this cut here, but Imai isn't normal. Levi fires his thunder spear, and the cut carries on. The smoke column from the spear is now another moving element on screen. Mikasa is now the focus. Also, did I mention the debris is heavily smeared? It is. The camera rotates halfway around Mikasa because Imai can animate rotations in his sleep. Also, insane bit of foreshortening here. Look how warped and energetic this arc is. Finally, after an unprecedented amount of action animation prowess, we cut away. These scenes are also animated by Imai, and the drawing quality is insane. 4 layers of shading here. Also such a smooth bit of animation, perfectly consistent and volumetric. Action isn't the only thing Imai is good at. Again, look at the amount of detail both in the eye and around it. Insane work by Imai. There isn't much else to talk about animation-wise. This conversation had a few wonky drawings, but the direction was incredible. Also, amazing backgrounds. The character acting was solid and complemented the amazing voice acting. The ocean of blood and the hair and teeth were anime-only additions. Also, this final bit of dialogue was partially reworked as per Isayama's own request. It is still the same ending, by the way. The compositing for this cut looks a bit off. The two characters don't blend in. It looks weird. Great scene though. Some decent drawings, amazing backgrounds, and top-notch storyboard work can be seen for the rest of this episode. Of course, these scenes carry a large amount of emotional weight. At least they do for me, but that's not what this video is about. And that just about does it. A once-in-a-lifetime show came to an end. Thank you so much to the entire staff for giving it their all despite the atrocious production conditions. I genuinely could not be more grateful. It was one of the most visually compelling things I have ever seen. That's about it. Did you like this video? Check out this other bit of content on screen. Make sure to like and subscribe, and until next time.